You're listening to Biotech Hangout, a live and unedited weekly discussion of all the latest news in our industry with a group of biotech insiders. I'm Grace Colón, and my co hosts today are Josh Schimmer, Eric Schmidt, Sam Fazeli, Yaron Werber, and Tess Cameron. For more information about our hosts or guest speakers, or to listen to the most recent episodes, please go to biotechhangout.com. So we have a lot to cover as usual, and we're going to go around the group to comment on some of the policy issues that are really top of mind for everyone in the industry and creating a lot of uncertainty and volatility. There was some interest to talk about Celtics and Knicks, but we'll save that for the end if there's any time. There's quite a bit of trash talking going around in our group. Before we get to the impact of policy moves, just as a reminder, setting some context, I'm sure everybody knows the XBI was down over 20% at one point in April year to date, trading under $70 or so, but bouncing back up with the early cautious optimism about new FDA Commissioner McCary's comments around expediting preclinical and clinical drug development, accelerated approvals, especially for rare diseases, even as of last week. Then this week, we had a number of things go on. So on May 6th, the decision to appoint Vinay Prasad as the next director of CBER, previously headed by Peters Marks, drove the XBI down by 7% in the first day of the announcement. And as of this morning, it's nearly down for the year about 14%. Prasad, I think everybody knows his background by now, hematologist, oncologist, UCSF professor, also an author and social media influencer who's been sharply critical of the agency and the pharmaceutical industry, particularly around COVID issues. Initially, his appointment created quite a bit of uncertainty and concern, particularly around things like vaccine and gene therapy, based on some comments he had made about, for example, Sarepta's products, use of surrogate endpoints, and particularly accelerated approval pathway in oncology, where he didn't like that he cited low overall survival statistics for new drugs approved. However, it's interesting. A lot of reporting came out yesterday about his first speech to staff on Wednesday, where he really struck a more conciliatory, open tone that was just a bit more humble, open to reconsidering his prior comments about randomized controlled trials, always being necessary. So that I think people were very pleasantly surprised by that. It sounds like the staff, really received his opening comments really well. Then on Wednesday, we also saw that President Trump pulled the nomination of his prior nominee, Jeanette Nashawat, a Fox contributor, be Surgeon General, and then appointed Casey Means, a physician with close ties to the Make America Healthy Again movement. And Means is a Stanford-trained physician, didn't quite finish her residency, and then pivoted into functional medicine and founded the glucose monitoring consumer health company Levels. She also does not have an active medical license and is a proponent of things like raw milk and a number of other things that the MAHA movement is supportive of. So that's the context of some things that happened this week. Let's go around the room and get some comments about these appointments. I know, Tess, you had some thoughts specifically on Sarepta related to this, but let's talk about the overall comments on these appointments, and then we can dive into the Sarepta news. So, Tess, why don't you start?
Yeah. Maybe just adding a couple things to what you said because I think same general, we saw it in the stocks, right? The reaction that investor has, which was like, wow, like, and what I thought was interesting is it wasn't just CBER stocks that were down, right? Which is going to be Vinay Prasad's, primary role is really CBER. So we saw Sarepta, Unicure, Capricorn, Taysha. It was also accelerated approval stocks that aren't within, CBER's purview. But I think that relates to the comments that you cited, Grace. I'd note that there were also a number of comments that he'd made previously just around the value of medicines to the point where, when I would kind of look at those tweets, it's like, okay, just, here's a clearly very smart man. Like, does he care about the hard work that so many people in our ecosystem are doing to develop innovative drugs? And similar to you, I was very encouraged by his, commentary. Also at the interview that him and McCary held yesterday, that were very encouraging, where he did reiterate, his appreciation for the value of innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives that forward. rare disease and emphasis on flexibility, emphasizing the really hard work that the FDA does and the quality of the people who the FDA has recruited, which is really, really important. I mean, these, are incredibly smart people doing very important work. Um, Vaccines, I don't know, right? Like, we'll have to see, what unfolds there. I think, he, shared that he plans to be very data oriented, and like we will have to see. Being data oriented can include reasonable things and can also include, some things that, can perhaps be pretty unreasonable or just make it really difficult for vaccines to be commercialized. So, curious in what others are thinking. I think we've heard very positive things from the FDA. So far, I'm still very much in wait and see mode to, actually, get a few more approvals through. It was certainly, reassuring to see the Veristem accelerated approval the next day. It was like, okay, like things are still functioning. The accelerated approval pathway is, perhaps still open, but I think we're going to have to, see more of that and see more, great things like the AI drug review. I mean, talk about like a fantastic application for AI. So, hopefully in the next couple of months, we really start to see, some of these words turn into action and, get a little more certainty around how the FDA is going to behave.
Great. No, fantastic additions. Sam, do you want to comment next?
Sure. Uh, I've been following Vinay Prasad for a while from a multiple myeloma perspective, because obviously he's a hematologist and he has lots of views and lots of ideas and very interesting to listen to. So, of course, the whole thing will end up being words are fine. What we need to see is what the actions are. So let me just give you an example of, excuse me, one of the things that he's been opposed to, and I'm not taking sides here whether that's right or wrong, but the FDA has recently said that a minimal or measurable residual disease can be an endpoint for filing. And some companies have, for instance, Arcellx just very recently said, or Gilead said, that they'd moved one of their trials to have MRD as a as an endpoint because to fit with what the FDA had said. So but Dr. Prasad is very against this. He thinks that it's not the right way to go forward. You're bringing a drug in that you don't know the absolute clinical benefit of. And he has some very solid arguments to support his view, which are openly available to listen to. What's going to happen now I'm very super interested, and I'm sure everybody who covers Arcellx and Gilead is is that going to result in CBER saying, because CAR Ts are under the CBER banner, those that endpoint is not acceptable anymore, and therefore companies have to change their endpoints. In which case, it makes some clinical trials extremely long to do in terms relative to just measuring MRD, which is a lot faster. And let me give you another wrinkle on this. If that ends up being the case, then if companies go to CDER with a bispecific antibody that looks at MRD, do they end up getting the same rule, or do they continue to have under CEDAR an acceptance of MRD as an endpoint? So these are things that it's just nice to know how they evolve. And of course, it creates uncertainty. Nobody likes uncertainty in the investment world. On the vaccine side, very quickly, on the 29th of April, there was commentary made that Dr. Prasad was in favor of the idea of doing COVID-19 boosters following randomized trials measuring clinical endpoints. Now, I recall that when we do flu vaccines, they're not clinical endpoints. They are antigenicity or immunogenicity studies. That's not a clinical endpoint, right? And perhaps by the time you do the flu, you've got some evidence of efficacy in the southern hemisphere. If that's acceptable for COVID shots, then good. The only thing is that currently COVID evolves much more quickly than flu has been. You get the strain in the south and you use that for the north. For COVID, we don't know what's going on, right? Is it possible to actually do a randomized trial, getting data from populations in the southern hemisphere is fine, but to do a randomized trial, organize it, set it up, by the time you've done it, your strain would have changed. So we end up in a situation where I don't see how these companies are going to be able to do that for boosters. And let's see if that remains a view that Dr. Prasad has. And it's obviously as of 29th of April, so only a few days ago. So again, uncertainty. And of course, the FDA will set the rules and people have to follow it.
No, those are great points, particularly around the nature of sort of seasonal strains and obviously pandemic strains as well. I mean, I ran the Tamiflu Alliance between Gilead and Roche way back when, and we did all this pandemic planning around influenza, never thinking Corona was going to be an issue. So, I mean, it's just going to be compounding, right? So, I think that that those are some of the real fears here, and also with cutbacks in public health, not only in the US but our support globally. It's very very concerning. I agree with you, and it'd be good to get some clarity on that. Josh, you want to go next? Oops, I think you're on mute. Okay, maybe we're having issues here. Eric, you want to go next?
Well, I'll give it a shot. Thank you, Grace. Thanks all. Pleasure as always to be with everyone today. Maybe three quick things on this appointment. Number one, nobody should be surprised by it, right? We've seen this organization, whether it's Trump appointing Casey Means to Surgeon General or Makari appointing Vinay Prasad to CBER head. This is all Maha. This is all RFK Jr. This is the new regime. So I know the markets took it on the chin, as you mentioned, Grace, but really we should by now all see this coming. Number two, my question is which Vinay Prasad is going to show up to work at CBER? Will it be the internet troll, the iconoclast on X, the maverick, the contrarian, the outspoken critic of pretty much anything that's accepted measure in society these days, or will it be the guy we saw, smart, engaging, gentlemanly, who was quoted in some of the articles around his CBER introductory meeting? I hope it's the latter, but it'll be very very interesting to see which Vinay Prasad we get. And third, I think you have to put Dr. Prasad's appointment in the context of Dr. Makari's leadership of the FDA. Sam, I hear you, and I too am very concerned about some of the comments he specifically made around accelerated approval pathways, but I do take some comfort in the fact that Dr. Makari most recently has been very, very open and engaging and vociferous around wanting to speed drug approvals. In fact, there was a press release from the FDA out just this week on AI incorporation into the review process. And again, Makari used that as an opportunity to talk about how we need to accelerate the review process. So when you have a boss in Makari who is setting out that more global environment for rapid review processes, I take some comfort and consolation that some of Dr. Prasad's policies maybe won't see the light of day. Let me pause there, and maybe Josh, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, yay! All right. Unfortunately, missed some of that, but I think I kind of know where what you were getting at with Vinay. Personally, seeing that at least so far we're getting his podcast personality and not his Twitter personality. Very excited to see what he's going to do. He is wicked sharp. You kind of see it in his writings and his deeper analyses. He's not going to let anyone slip anything by the FDA that is not a good and important therapy for patients. And we see from time to time some game playing around drug development to get drugs approved and commercialized, perhaps in ways that are uh, intentionally perhaps overstating their value to patients. And best we can tell, he does not seem to be someone who's going to tolerate that. It seems clear that he's going to raise the bar at CBER. I think many of us did feel like that bar had tipped a little too low to be healthy for the industry and for patients for the long term. Now, that's always going to be subjective. And Peter Marks made very good cases as to why he was okay approving drugs that may not actually, in the end of the day, be benefiting patients, but he wanted to give them the chance. Now, I'm not sure Vinay is going to be as sympathetic for drugs that haven't really shown a meaningful benefit to patients. From what I've read from him, aside from some of the cantankerous comments and inflammatory comments that he'll kind of shoot from his hip at times, that in ways that you kind of wish he didn't, but he really is looking for those drugs that are adding value for patients in a tangible way, and that is what our industry is about for the most part. I look at the names that I cover and the names that we're following. We generally don't support products that we don't think are going to have an important value for patients, and so if he's going to set the bar a little bit higher, uh, would benefit us. I'm going to see what he brings, hoping that he leaves that Twitter personality at home.
Great. Yaron.
Well, I mean, I think that at the end, what we're going to get, my sense is we're seeing two different personalities and a little bit two different ideologies against a backdrop of major change coming from Kennedy even, with a goal to expedite at the same time. So I think that it's not going to end up being a simple package that's going to be it's not going to be a gift that we're going to know exactly what that toy does. It's going to have a lot of variability. And look, we talked about two different examples. One of them is mRNA negativity, and it's probably going to end up being in the context of how validated is that therapeutic, given that some of the other therapeutics in the class have survival data. In COVID vaccines, I think we're beginning to see also with Novavax that things are going to become a little bit more bifurcated, and perhaps maybe Josh, what you're alluding to, the bar is going to get ratcheted up with the way they look at things scientifically, and it's not it's the agency is going to become less predictable, and that's probably going to make our life a little bit more complicated. But at the end, I'm also don't believe that it's we're all going into one direction that's negative. I think there's going to be positives and there's going to be some setbacks. And I'm just hoping that 4 years from now, there's obviously a lot more positive than not. And I'm staying optimistic. I'm a little bit more concerned about the overall change at FDA than the change in its specific area.
Great, thank you. Well, why don't we dive into what this means for particular companies? I mean, obviously, this is earnings season, and on top of that, we're having all these other added uncertainties. And so, a good example of that is Sarepta. And I know Tess, you're covering them. Why don't you give us your thoughts on how this is all impacting them and what's going on with the company?
Yeah, so I think Sarepta had things doubly hard that day because first there was the news of Vinay Prasad being dominated. He'd really questioned, the whether that Elevitas, their gene therapy drug, should have been approved. So the stock was down 25% on his nomination, and then on earnings it went down even more. So down another 12% on earnings that came out that evening. So really a double whammy. And the earnings, what happened at earnings that evening is they reduced guidance from 2.9 to 3.1 billion for the year to 2.3 to 2.6 billion for the year. I think the first thing everyone probably looked at when they saw that earnings guidance was like, oh my gosh, this is all because of the really unfortunate patient death that they shared, earlier this year. That was a non-ambulatory, patient who'd been dosed with the drug and had a concurrent CMV infection and unfortunately passed away. But it turns out it's actually quite a bit more complicated than that. Like just as always, right? With these, gene therapy launches, there's a lot of complexity, and it was not only this, safety event. Certainly did have an impact on the prescribing of some physicians, but there was also flu season. And what I thought was really interesting is that they talked about their top prescribing physicians and one issue impacting guidance really being that their top physicians are fully booked and don't have any capacity to administer drug to more patients. And so it's really the broader physician community that they need to spend more time with, and that's perhaps the physician community that maybe is maybe doesn't have the same capabilities as the top physicians to explain the risk benefit to different patient populations, and talk to families about what that could mean. So, as always, I think that sounds like there's more complexity than exactly what meets the eye, and a lot of just execution issues, as is not atypical for a gene therapy launch. I did think, and I'd be interested in other perspectives on this, but I do give credit to Doug Ingram and his team for just being very upfront and very direct about here's the change in guidance, and here's why, and here's what we're doing about it. And I think they we're very straightforward and direct, and put a plan in place that's really focusing on just higher touch support for a broader group of physicians that makes a lot of sense. And that's something that we don't always get when we have these guidance revisions or a weak quarter. So while certainly a challenging message to deliver, I thought they delivered that quite clearly.
Great, thanks. So let's dive a little bit more into what's going on at the FDA. And I think, Tess, you stated it beautifully earlier. I think we are all in awe of FDA staff, both current and former, just incredibly experienced and dedicated professionals. They are doing their best. We're hearing a lot of good things about sort of the way they're engaging in meetings, the way they're doing their best to respond quickly. A lot of this is outside their control. So when we talk about problems with the FDA, I want to remind listeners and everyone that this is not specifically about FDA staff. It's really about the nature of the uncertainty, not only around what's happening with specific staffing vacancies, especially in leadership positions, but also just in terms of the process and some of these kind of potential changes that may come into play with new leadership at HHS all around. So, there've been some PDUFA dates that have been high profile that have not been met, such as Stealth Biotherapeutics Barth syndrome treatment, Novavax COVID-19 vaccine, which we'll get to in a minute, and then even as recently as this week, GSK, they were looking for an additional approval for an additional indication in their IL-5 antibody for COVID, which they were hoping would compete with Sanofi and Regeneron's Dupixent in that indication. That they got that approval in September. So their stock took a little bit of a hit about that. So, we are likely going to see more of these. But let's talk specifically about what's going on with the vaccine companies, starting with Novavax. I know Eric, you're covering them, and we also had comments. Sam and Yaron also had comments on what's going on in these companies. So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. Not covering them officially, but certainly paying close attention to this drama, like everyone else is. And I think our listeners probably know that the COVID-19 vaccine that Novavax is trying to get approved, their PDUFA date earlier this month, or actually it was earlier last month, came and went, and still no word. And the company, of course, did its earnings call this week and continued to put forth the view that they think they've satisfied all the approval requirements for licensure. And at least they're hopeful that once they agree with the FDA staffers on a phase 4 commitment, they can move forward here and get this drug approved. What puts that all at risk, of course, is the comments that senior leadership at the FDA has made. Dr. Makary, in particular, has been out on X and various media outlets saying that we need to rethink the approval process for COVID vaccines. And what's maybe most worrisome here is that the one thing that unites RFK Jr., Dr. Makary, and Dr. Prasad is antagonism toward how we treated COVID and how we vaccinated individuals against this infectious disease. You could argue that Makary and Prasad essentially owe their jobs to the fact that they were outspoken critics of COVID vaccination. I don't believe that, and it definitely does not sound, by the way, that Dr. Prasad is an anti-vaxxer. He certainly doesn't seem to believe MMR causes autism, et cetera. But again, he and Makary have been very critical of this vaccine. So what I think is going to be very, very interesting, and is the reason we're all paying so much close attention, is should Novavax be able to gain some alignment with the review staff at CBER on this licensure. What will the higher ups at the agency do? Will they let this go through or not? I just like to comment that, unlike some Peter Marks decisions that were judgment based, you called out earlier, Tess, the issues that we had with Elvitis and Sarepta. This is not really a scientific judgment call. This is unfortunately a political call. So it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens. I don't believe there's any scientific basis around which this protein-based vaccine should not be approved. It's been proven safe and efficacious, and obviously has saved many, many lives historically. So no basis that I'm aware of that we shouldn't have licensure, but we may not, and that'll be a very, very interesting point in time in our regulatory system. But I'll turn it over to others if they would like to comment.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yes,
Sam.
thanks, Grace. So just to add a little bit to the very nice way that Eric put this, what I was kind of thinking, okay, these folks aren't particularly fans of the mRNA vaccines, so therefore maybe a protein vaccine will have more opportunity. Until, of course, the conversation turned to first how you do the trials, and secondly, the comments that I've heard against single antigen vaccines. The idea being that we want to move back to a technology that's, I don't know, guys, help me. How old is the killed virus vaccine, which supposedly provides a whole bunch more antigens? To that platform, of course, takes the rug away from under the feet of all of these vaccines because they're all single antigen vaccines. So if you put those two things together, the idea being not in favor of approving COVID vaccines without a randomized clinical trial and not liking single antigen vaccines, if those continue to be the view of the FDA, then we have a problem. Now, I think what I've been hearing is at the end of it, or at least the way that I'm reading it, is that they're not going to get in the way of getting these shots for people who are at risk. It's more the under 40s or kids or babies, etc. So the hope is that the at-risk population is still a big enough market, at least for the mRNA vaccine folks, Moderna and BioNTech, to continue to generate the revenues they've been doing. But Novavax, I don't see. I think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place at the minute.
I would agree on on Novavax. I just would kind of set aside, Grace. You talked about a couple of different approvals. One of them being stealth, and then the other both being COVID related. I would say I'm not necessarily worried yet about a PDUFA date for something perhaps more complex being delayed, right? Like just rewinding back a couple of years, like if you remember the drama around Sarepta saying we don't need an adcom for Elevidus, and then we do need an adcom for Elevidus, or the CAR T therapies, which were kind of marching towards approval, and then all of a sudden, like, I think the Abecma, like, PDUFA was put back and, there was going to be an adcom. So I think, even for, very well, kind of published data sets, we've seen question marks come up throughout the approval process that have, caused, some anxiety and shifted things around. So I think that's, not too unusual to happen once or twice or three times for reviews that are more complex. But if we see that happen as a pattern, I think that's where it would start getting more concerning. This is talking outside of the infectious disease space, which I think is now being subject to what is really a different set of rules. We don't know yet whether rare is going to be subject to a different set of rules, and we'll have to, we're hearing some good words, and we'll want to see some action.
Well, there's
So, go
yeah, I
ahead.
was going to
Yeah.
say we have a tiny bit slivers of windows as to on the rare side what's going on at CBER, and so Ultragenics continues to say that their review. Remember, they're filing for gene therapy for MPS3, Sanfilippo syndrome, based on heparan sulfate as a biomarker. Remember, they're one of three who are going into this accelerated pathway with CBER under Marks, it looks like that continues to remain absolutely on track. And they're getting very constructive feedback, at least to the reviewer team. Again, I guess the question is going to happen: what is it actually going to happen when someone at the top needs to sign it? But we are seeing signs that at least certain innovation continues to be on track. On vaccine, again, it looks like, Sam, to your point, it's getting very bifurcated. It looks like most likely the mRNA vaccines that are approved, the next gen version probably will be authorized, but with a more potentially with a stricter label without new data requirements. That's at least the latest thinking. But at the same time, they are, to your point again, they're not even going to bother going for a new vaccine in the under 50. Um, so the bar is raised, but that was also partially because they couldn't show up great efficacy. So the bar inevitably is going to get raised for vaccines. I think that's pretty clear.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Very thoughtful discussion. The key word here is some uncertainty, although we're beginning to see some trends here. One more big policy topic before we get to some data and some other earnings and other tidbits. And that's, of course, some of the announcements and the fear and the discussions going on around potentially incorporating a most favored nation policy as part of this package coming up. I don't think it'll have the votes, but the goal was to tie Medicaid drug payments to the lowest prices paid in other wealthy countries, which of course would be a huge disaster for the industry. It's been estimated it would have up to a $1 trillion negative impact to the industry over the next 10 years. Even the Wall Street Journal had a sharply critical op-ed by its editorial board on Wednesday and pointed out, I think appropriately so, that savings from the plan would be negligible. It would have huge impact on negative impact on innovation. I think there's been a lot of reporting and a lot of discussion that it's not enough key members of Congress on both sides understand this, and it's going to be a non-starter in reconciliation. However, there is very real fear reported by a number of sources, including Politico, that there will probably be an executive order broadly addressing this as soon as next week, maybe even early next week. I don't know if we'll have time at the end, but there's a lot of advocacy going on. It's really important that they hear from us. And if we have a few minutes, we can talk about that. So, of course, these challenges are coming on top of some of the uncertainty around tariffs. um, Based on that, we've had even more pharma announcements this week regarding increasing manufacturing and R&D investments in the U.S., including BMS with 40 billion on top of all their aggressive cost cutting. Gilead mentioned an additional 11 billion and 3,000 jobs on top of a prior commitment of 21 billion, and Takeda promised a $30 billion investment. I know we touched upon this last week, and there was some discussion around how much of this is really additive to what they would have done anyway, versus brand new investments. And I know several of you, I think all of you, had thoughts on all of these issues. Why don't we start with
Yeah,
Tess?
absolutely. So, I think it's been a whirlwind, Grace, because as you said, so let's actually step back and talk about, the first Trump administration. So, in the first Trump administration, this MFN idea is not new. This was introduced in the first Trump administration. He brought it up in July of 2020 originally, I want to say, and it was for both Part D and B, as in boy, basically saying, hey, we're going to look to a certain set of OECD countries, and whoever is the lowest in those OECD countries on a GDP, per capita adjusted basis, that is going to become what Part D and Part B pays. It was further revised. There was the second executive order that came out, a couple months later, that was basically just for Part B, as in boy, and there was actually a CMS interim final rule that came out, a little bit later after that, that was focused on how this would be implemented. And the way that the executive order was drafted was to make it a CMMI demo. So, what is CMMI? So, CMMI, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation. And CMMI does these demos. They're usually looking at things like, hey, let's see how value-based care works, and let's go to this one region and we'll do this value-based care pilot and we'll see if it's good. And if it's good, we're going to, encourage legislation or something that would actually cause this to roll out more broadly. So that's kind of the classical way that CMMI has been used is for these pilots. Now, that's a pretty darn big pilot. If you're like, well, the pilot is that we are going to cause the whole country to have price controls coming in from Europe. Whatever is the cheapest European country is basically going to become the price. And it's not just Europe, actually, it's also Canada and Japan and New Zealand and Australia and a whole bunch of other countries that really use like health technology assessments and other ways that are using math that I think Americans would be very, very uncomfortable with because it includes a judgment of, the value of patient life that many Americans would not necessarily agree with to price those drugs. Um, and so that is kind of the history. And so I think the fear, has been, okay, is MFN for Medicare going to come back? And then it was a few weeks ago, oh my gosh, is it going to be MFN for Medicaid? And Medicaid is not just Medicaid, the like 10% of drug volume. Medicaid is like, oh gosh, Medicaid, best price. Best price has flow through to so many other things, including 340B, which has totally exploded and is now like a very substantial portion of actual, volume of branded drugs in the US. So either of these policies, either MFN for Medicare or Medicaid, would have a very substantial impact on price. Um, on the price in the U.S., it would have a very substantial impact on incentives, and it would really encourage a lot of companies to think about just doing a U.S. launch. But that still, even if you're saying, look, companies have preserved the right to do a US launch, you're still kind of taking away the value that a company could have had by going to Germany and getting a few dollars from Germany and a few dollars from the UK and a few dollars from Canada. And like those dollars can add up and become part of an NPV that is either positive or negative. On a relative basis when compared to other things, and maybe taking out ex US actually shifts that NPV and you no longer want to invest in that drug. And MFN would be a policy that greatly contributes to that and really lowers the opportunity size for a lot of, for a lot of drugs. And I think that's kind of the intent, Grace, is that, I think the intent is very much actually other countries should be paying more, right? But we as America don't want to get less innovation in our attempt to get other countries to pay more. Let's try and use other methods that are available like trade policy to try and get other countries to pay more for drugs. So that is maybe just an overall perspective on, overall perspective on the legislation. And, I think, MFN combined with tariffs, really, creates a challenging, a challenging setup for pharmas. I feel incredibly sympathetic for any finance slash investor relations, department of any pharma that has not yet reported earnings and is, potentially going to be reporting those earnings after a MFN announcement and potentially after a tariff announcement, which, we hope MFN, we may or may not get updates on those early next week.
Can I ask maybe
Thanks.
just
Go
in
ahead. Yeah.
part to be provocative, but part serious, like most lower income countries do reference price routinely. So why would we hold the U.S. to any different standard when it comes to the lower income part of America, the Medicaid patients? I mean, there is, Tess, to your point, like the United States funds all the innovation for the world. And it's one of our most important exports, bioinnovation, that these drugs that improve and extend lives. And for other countries to not put in the same investment for that innovation, is an obvious concern. Um, so again, like philosophically, why shouldn't the U.S. Institute a most favored nation policy as well? And in part to incentivize other countries to pay more of their fair share, but also to align with the practices of almost every other country in the world.
So I think that the US absolutely should be pushing other countries to make more investment, right? Like it is the kind of defense NATO problem of like, why are we paying for all of this like great stuff that helps to make our world a better place? Like, shouldn't others also be contributing? I think that intent is a very, very good one. The strategy is good, the tactics are bad, right? Like doing that by essentially instituting policy that would cause companies to solely launch in the US. Um, okay, we can do that, but that is going to cause less drugs to be innovated and be created in the first place because the pie is just smaller, right? And the opportunity is smaller because they can't get those incremental dollars overseas. And so I think that the strategy is a really good one. I think there's better ways to do it related to trade policy, I think. Having the U.S. really encourage other countries to pay, GDP adjusted amounts that are very much in line with the U.S. I think that should be a key objective in like all of these trade deals that are going to be happening over the next couple of months. We saw the UK one yesterday, which was obviously a very specific circumstance, but I think that really should be an objective, and it would be much more practical as part of like a trade negotiation than it would be by this particular policy tool.
Yeah, I
Great.
think
We've all seen how. Oh, go ahead.
Can
Yeah.
I add to the devil's advocate aspect that Josh just brought in? This is not my view. I'm not reading the future. But let's take what Jess just said as say it becomes reality that I've developed a drug. I'm going to launch it in the US, only in the US. Then there's no reference price. I can put whatever price I want. This might actually push drug prices in the US higher because you've got no other reference. And then in 2 years' time, I'll go and launch it in Germany, bring the price down a little bit. And at that point, I don't mind getting reference to that because I've spent some time building the market in the US. And so there's one possibility. I mean, I don't know if it's a reality or not, or have I not thought it through enough? And the second point I want to say is AstraZeneca CEO, when asked this question, said first, yes, the US is that doing this and Europe should pay its fair share. Then he came back and added another layer to it. But the problem that the world has is that they take net price. They should be comparing net prices to what people pay in the US and in Europe, for example. And in many cases, those prices are very similar or very small differences. The problem pharma has is that they don't publish their net prices. Maybe they don't even know their net prices. But that's another element that I think has to be taken into account. We always talk about it, but we have no transparency on it.
Maybe just to
I think there's this issue. What's driving all of this is the issue of all the middlemen, and we need PBM reform. So, what's driving the populism on both sides, the left and the right, is what people actually pay when they go to the pharmacy. So, it's pricing and access. The fact that we have copays for life-saving drugs is egregious, right? Nobody's going to be abusing and drugs that they actually need to improve their quality of life or lives, and also access, right? We putting in place all these step edits. So people are rightfully frustrated and they take it out against the pharma industry because it's an easy scapegoat. But we've got 340B, which is also egregiously being abused. It's supposed to pay for drugs for people who can't afford it, but instead it's turned into a line for big hospital centers that are important employment drivers for the regions, and so their congressional leaders support it. So it's a big web. It's very complicated. It's very easy when people have to pay huge premiums and huge copays. That's what's driving it. And it's also clear that in other countries, the way they do health economics does not adequately capture the cost aversion. And to your point as well, there's also not enough transparency. So there's a lot going on. And I think there's this broader picture where the industry needs to be less reactionary and think of a broad deal along the lines of what we've all been talking about here. But I'd love others chime in. Sorry, I think I was it Eric. I interrupted
well,
someone. Go ahead.
you guys are all making some wonderfully lucid economic arguments about why this is a good or bad idea. I just want to interject that there's a whole political aspect to this. This proposal that may or may not come out next week is really a a democratic program, right? It's very progressive, very leftist. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens between Congress and this administration when Trump does come out and say, I think we should have MFN pricing. The first person who's going to slap him on the back is Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC and the rest of the very progressive party component of the Democratic Party. It's going to be fascinating political theater. And the congressmen, the Republicans in Congress at least, are going to hate this. So it may really create some political repercussions that will not only be good theater, but are really going to pit, I think, this administration against this Congress in a way that we've never seen before. So I think we can't lose sight of the bigger picture as well. Just throw that out there.
But again, I guess that
I think we lost you, unless that's me.
I think we can hear. Grace, can you hear us? We can hear you. Maybe I let.
Can everybody can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we
I
hear
think
you.
we
We,
Yeah, we can hear
lost
yep.
you,
you.
Grace. Yep. Let me. It's Yaron. Let me actually to Eric's point. We just published our podcast with John Crowley. I think just a couple of days ago, who was fresh out of the White House, and of course, look, John is incredible, and of course, he's got a public job to do. But he's obviously a steadfast believer that the White House is not intending to destroy the biotech industry. In fact, right, if we look, there's only been 4 commissions on different sectors of national importance, and biotech, of course, is the fourth. Obviously, the other one were chips, AI, and technology. And so, overall, that's the goal is not to harm our industry. The goal is to try to bridge things. I don't think that we're going to be able to entice the Europeans to pay more for their healthcare systems. Not that I don't agree with it, but I'm not sure that's also, what our job is. They have their own philosophy, and they're frankly already restricting access fairly severely, as we know. The biggest challenge is to, and you've all said it, is what do you index to? Because if you index to the published price, that's one thing. The non-published price, frankly, I believe is proprietary, and is confidential of what you're doing. That's part of the I just is what you're paying the NHS. I don't know how the U.S. government gets access to that to then reference it. So it's going to be it's probably going to require some kind of potential political solution. Um, Again, I love how you started, but you don't have the votes. I think this is populist as a part of a much broader plan to ultimately negotiate a lot of things. I personally don't think this is the light of day.
Okay, well, let's jump into because we only have about 12 more minutes, and I want to make sure that we can get to data and earnings. I'm sure we could have several hours worth discussion on policy, and there will be more every week. So why don't we talk about some innovation coming out of Genocury? I think Sam, you wanted to talk about that.
Yes, I mean, so this is an N of one trial, or can we call it a trial? Test, experiment. And it's a Chinese company, and it's an in vivo CAR T technology and 100% CR rate. So it's, but then when you only have one patient, you're either going to be 0 or 100%. So the question, of course, ends up being the same thing that we ask of every CAR T is what's the durability? But it seemed like a very clean result. It avoids all the issues that you have to deal with when it comes to CAR T, current allogeneic CAR T manufacturing. Autologous CAR T manufacturing, and we just have to wait and see what the rest of the data looks like. I just have to say that I do remember the day that Legend brought X number of a few patients to an ASCO presentation, and I think a lot of people didn't believe it. So I look forward to seeing more data here. And we all know that everybody is excited about in vivo CAR T as the next real big leap in CAR T therapy, because it will avoid a whole host of stuff, including manufacturing issues, preconditioning, etc. So that's, I think, as far as I can go, because there's not much else to talk about. It's just one patient.
Absolutely. So, Tess, I know you wanted to talk about PTC and their update on their Huntington's disease program.
Yes, absolutely. So PTC's Huntington's disease program. I mean, this is a disease area that's just been incredibly hard to crack. Very high unmet need. And there was a lot of excitement around PTC's program, which had shown, which had shown a positive impact on functional outcomes, and the relevant, the relevant functional outcome in Huntington's is something called CUHDRS. There was, PTC talked about a potential path, for accelerated approval that would be based on, really seeing a correlation of biomarkers, namely HTT reduction, as well as the UHDRS. And so people were very, interested in looking for that connection, right? Novartis, obviously also, very heavily invested in this, in this asset with a $1 billion deal that was announced many months ago. And the data that came out earlier this week, that was a bit mixed. So they essentially saw that the blood HTT reductions looked good. We saw dose dependency. We saw some clear reductions. CSF HTT reductions, that was a little less clean, and then resulting in just I think less dose response there. And then when we got to the functional outcomes, that was a little bit more challenging. Where in the stage 3 patients, we actually saw a fair bit of worsening for patients on the high dose drug. Now they also shared some data on CUHDRS at month 24 relative to natural history, and that was interesting and supportive data. There was some supportive data on NFL, but I think the best reflection of investor anticipation around the probability of accelerated approval here is that when Vinay Prasad then got nominated for CBER a few days later, this stock did not move very much, and many other accelerated approval stocks did. We'll have to wait more to see what the path is for PTC. For this drug, and what the regulatory path could look like, and if that's going to take a bigger trial, or if there's a potential path with what they have.
Great, thank you. Let's move now to earnings. Obviously, earnings season continues, and there's some things that we're seeing macro level that I know Josh and Yaron wanted to touch upon, and then we were going to go into specific companies. So, Josh, why don't you start?
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me because it seems like sound's been a little erratic
Yep.
today. Yeah. So what's interesting, right, is that we're coming off a stretch where most product launches were actually doing quite well, and the stocks were working around them, and then we kind of ran smack first into the first quarter earnings, and first quarter historically the one of the most challenging quarters of the year. You have plans or patients transitioning plans, et cetera, and all sorts of headwinds. And on top of that, we have some of the IRA headwinds that are kicking in. So this time earnings was kind of all over the place, probably a little bit more bearish than bullish. Some exemptions for companies, recognizing that the first quarter can be a difficult quarter, but number of stocks trading down fairly significantly on their earnings updates. Names like Day One, Amicus, Sarepta we talked about, Syndax, Fathom, Iovance really um, took a hit as with their own revised guidance, and a smaller group of companies that traded up significantly around their earning updates. Some of those examples being Kinex, Acadia, and Blueprint.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is actually an interesting dynamic. The IRA Part D redesign is actually having it's a double-edged sword. It's a frenemy. It's a friend and an enemy, and in the sense that if you for Part D drugs who've been on the market, the companies no longer have to pay the copay support. So depending on how your drug is priced, for many of them it's actually a tailwind. But for those who have very expensive drugs, then they have to pay the 20% copay. And it depends on, but they get a lot of volume. So that's actually a positive. But for drugs that have an IV and a sub-Q component, what we're seeing now is a flux away from IV towards sub-Q because it's much better for the patients. And then suddenly the companies are now have to pay the 20% copay because their drugs are expensive and they hit the catastrophic. So it's definitely early, but we're definitely seeing a dual prong approach so far. And I agree with Josh. Earnings has been because of it a little bit more unpredictable than it has been in the past. But overall, Part D redesign is probably going to end up being a fairly positive because of volume.
Great. So thank you. So back to Josh on Krystal Biotechs and their new gene therapy program and what's going on with some of the things there.
Yeah, I thought I'd flag this one. Not the best print for Krystal's Vyjuvek, their HSV gene therapy for dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa. Expectations were fairly high, and they had some headwinds in terms of new patient starts and patients taking holidays, which is a great thing because it means the drug's really working for those patients and they can take a little bit of break from dosing. But what caught my eye was uh, they're announcing a new indication, a basically an HSV gene therapy eye drop to treat neurotrophic keratitis, which is a condition we don't hear too much about. There's a drug approved from a private company, Dompe. I think I'm pronouncing that right. The drug's called Oxervate, but because they're a private company, they don't really report sales. No one pays attention to it, but there are some reports that suggest that that product is selling $1 billion a year, and it requires like 6 drops a day, 6 eye drops a day, so like every 2 hours for up to 8 weeks. And so Crystal's trying to basically deliver the same therapy, a recombinant nerve growth factor, using a gene therapy approach. And they've got some interesting validation in an animal model. They also have validation from Vyjuvek itself as an ocular eye drop that looks like it's doing quite well for the DEB patients who have these corneal lesions as well. I think what's interesting about this, or in terms of how it reflects upon the broader ecosystem in biotech and how challenging it can be for companies to get any value recognition for earlier stage programs. We see it time and time again. I know it gets very frustrating for the companies because it can affect the cost of capital and their ability to invest in earlier stage programs. So, nothing unique to Krystal about this. It got very little attention because most of the focus was on Vyjuvek, as one would expect it would be, and maybe some of their later clinical stage programs. But it is a conundrum that the industry continues to face, which is, how do you get the value credit for earlier stage programs to lower your cost of capital to continue to invest in those the earlier stage programs? I don't see many great solutions to it. You're a little bit damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you don't invest in the early stage programs, even though you're not getting value ascribed to it, then eventually investors are going to come back and say, "Hey, what else do you have for us?" And if the answer is, "Well, we didn't invest because you didn't give us any credit to invest in them," that's not a fulfilling answer. Or companies have to continue to invest higher capital dollars into those programs, knowing they're not going to get any credit for them for some time. But eventually, investors are going to come back and say, "Hey, what else do you have for us?" And you should have something to show for them.
It's a great point. We have about a minute left. I know we wanted to touch on Novo and also some related news on Lilly. If we have one more minute, maybe some quick words around that. I know that Sam and maybe a couple others had comments.
Okay, let's see if I can do it in a minute. Novo missed on Wegovy and they downgraded the guidance and the share price went up. Lilly met on Q1, didn't change guidance, share price went down. Simple answer is that people expected the Novo downgrade, so everybody was kind of positioned that way, and the share price has gone up. And they gave some really positive comments about the rest of the year. Lilly is sitting so relatively high on its valuation. I'm not commenting on whether it's cheap or expensive. And of course, when you have high valuation, you need to deliver constant beats or raises. Two things I want to highlight out of what Novo said. One is they're thinking that it would take until through the second half of the year for the impact of the compounding pharmacies to wash through their inventory to reduce, and that Wegovy is 60% of the compounding volume that's out there, so they're more impacted. And then, of course, they've got two bits of data coming in the second half. One is the Alzheimer's, and the other one is their CagriSema versus Zepbound, which could be interesting to see if they turn out to be positive. That obviously is very important for the company.
Wonderful. Thank you.